the central thing that President Trump was pushing for in his election was economic security, right? Was changing the economy, was making things more affordable for people. And on that very basic principle, he is just not meeting the mark by any standard.
That was Michigan Democratic Senator Elissa Slotkin on CBS Mornings in her first interview since delivering her party's response to the president's joint address. Let's bring in our power political panel of Sabrina Rodriguez and Finn Gomez. Sabrina is national political reporter for The Washington Post, and Finn Gomez is our executive director of White House and politics coverage. Great to have you both with us today. Thanks so much. Finn, let's start with Senator Slotkin, who used to be a House member, now a senator. I mean, she is so interesting because she was elected on the same ballot as Donald Trump in Michigan. So it kind of makes sense why Democrats chose her to give this address. I'm wondering kind of what the feedback has been on this address. Are people paying attention to it? Have Democrats kind of said, look, this is kind of where we want to go? What do you make of her address?
Well, you know, I spoke to a lot of Democrats, actually, who gave just really positive reviews about her rebuttal to the president's address the other night. Senator Ruben Gallego from Arizona, who also won in a state that Trump won, you know, are this new face of the Democratic Party, many think, within their own party. They represent the sort of center-left, but not just center-left. It's like they're meeting people where they are. They're talking about issues that Trump won on in a new way, and I think that that's what she did, also representing many of the same ideals of the Democratic Party, but at the same time not speaking past most voters, if you will. And that's the feedback that I've received. And I think that what we saw that night and also in that interview showcases someone who is becoming a rising star. Yeah,
you had that official rebuttal, and then you had other rebuttals from members of Congress in the chamber there. I mean, Al Green, everybody now knows he interrupted the president, got kicked out of the chamber. Today, he was officially censured by the House, including from some Democrats, Sabrina, who supported that measure. I know you've got some reporting on this. What have you been finding?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we saw between Tuesday and today's vote on the censure just shows the rift within the Democratic Party. We saw it on display in just how much the variety of responses we saw to Trump's address on Tuesday. You know, what we saw at 11 p.m. after Trump's speech from Slotkin is not necessarily what we saw throughout the night in terms of the reaction from people who were in the chamber. You know, you saw a variety, the paddles that have been mocked very much on social media that some Democrats held up, saying Musk steals, save Medicaid. There were some people who walked out. There were some people who didn't show up at all. There was folks like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where she decided instead, you know, she didn't want to be there in person and she was going to engage with her followers on social media instead. So there's been that range of responses, and it sort of all came to the culmination today of that censure vote, where it was a question for some Democrats of, okay, are we going to stand with Congressman Al Green, or are we going to condemn this? And for the 10 that voted, you know, in favor of the censure, one of the things we've heard from those who have spoken up already about why they made that decision was sort of this feeling that they might not support Donald Trump, but at the end of the day, they support the institution. They want to preserve the integrity of what should happen on that night, on the way that things should work, have still respect for the office of the president, even if they don't necessarily agree with that person in office.
Yeah, it's interesting. You kind of have these two images, one of Al Green, one of Slotkin. We'll see kind of how voters across the country interpret that as time goes on. Finn, I do want to talk about Trump's efforts to dismantle the Department of Education. He's made no secret about this. I mean, we all covered him on the trail. He said this over and over again. And he's not the first Republican to want to get rid of the Department of Education. But we know he's going to sign an executive order. What do we know about what he wants to do here?
Yeah, well, we reported this morning that the president was essentially preparing an executive order that would direct his new Education Secretary, Linda McMahon, who we know from his last time in office, and to essentially start the process of dismantling the Department of Education. As you said, CHB, you know, this has been a long target of conservatives going back to like the Reagan era. So there's nothing new on that front. But however, like you reported, and some excellent reporting, by the way, CHB, on how they essentially dismantled USAID. There was essentially, that was the pathway that they were going to do here. Today, it seemed like they were walking it back, that it wasn't going to happen today as we thought it might happen. But he was asked about it just a little while ago in the Oval Office, where he essentially said if he's had second thoughts about this, and he said, no, I want to bring the schools back to the states I've said it 100 times. So there's no change there.
That's interesting, Finn, and I'm glad you brought that up because Trump talks so frequently during the day, which is great. We hear from him a lot, which is great, but oftentimes we don't get that in real time. So I'm glad you brought that reporting to us. Sabrina, I mean, Republicans in Congress are all for this effort, but in order to completely abolish the agency, it has to go through Congress. I'm curious kind of what you make of this discussion and whether it would actually happen.
I mean, the reality is that to abolish an agency like this, first, it's unprecedented. This has not happened. Of course, that does not deter Donald Trump from trying to do this. And I think right now we're seeing this conversation happening far more in earnest than we've seen in administrations past, even if it is something that Republicans historically wanted, because Donald Trump is not trying to follow the rules here. Donald Trump is trying to be aggressive, make very clear what the agenda is. This is something he talked about countless times on the campaign trail. And like he said today, he's repeated himself many times on it. But the reality is this is something that requires congressional approval. This is something that the Senate would have to get 60 votes. And the reality is that this is not something that Democrats are supportive of. So to see a world in which that gets the 60 votes necessary, we're not there yet. Now, can Trump do a lot of things to gut the department, to really dwindle its power, to dwindle what exactly it does in its mandate? Absolutely. He can do that the same way that we've seen him do it with USAID, and I think there's an open question of how he will do that in the months to come.
Yeah, that is the big question about what exactly it looks like. And we know this president also is fine to challenge a lot of kind of invites legal challenges as well. And then just quickly on tariffs, just quickly from both of you. I mean, it seems like everyone is trying to figure out where the president is on this. What are the consequences?
There's so much volatility right now. You know, we've seen it with a lot of things in Trump's agenda, but the reality is that for U.S. businesses, there's so much uncertainty. You know, today he announced a 1-month exemption for Mexico and for Canada for goods that are compliant with USMCA. For Mexican goods, that's about 40% to 50% of what we buy from Mexico. And in Canada, it's something closer to 38%. But these are all like very complicated specifics. So for a lot of companies, they're grappling saying, okay, how do we change our supply chains? What exactly do we need to be doing? It's a 1-month exemption. Is it something that he might do going forward? Is he going to end up rolling back the tariffs? There's so many questions. And with Trump just kind of on the fly making these changes, it really creates an unpredictability for those companies and ultimately can mean that we're going to be paying more when we go to the grocery store and when we go and shop.
Yeah, and Republicans seem to want to give him some latitude here. They know he likes the word tariffs. They're just wondering
it's his favorite word, right? But I will say, just to add to what the Duchess of Hialeah said on that volatility, it is like, do not look at your 401k. I did that mistake earlier today, and it was a little bit of my eyes still hurt from seeing it. But I will say, look, I mean, he was asked about that again. Is that playing a role in his decision to sort of walk this back? He said, no, of course not. But we do know he is getting pressure not only from CEOs, as we know, from the top big 3 automakers, but also from Republican senators in those agrarian states that's saying like, our agribusiness could be hurting here. So there's a lot of trepidation. We heard Senator Paul say something about that today. So will he proceed forward? He not only did he campaign on tariffs, he's been talking about it for decades also.
Exactly. Nobody can be surprised by it, but they're wondering how exactly he'll use them. Finn and Sabrina, thank you so much.